Liberty gives an opportunity for evil and tyranny to destroy it. And of course, man hasn't figured out how to fix it because it's unfixable. So when you hear people say they have a right to free speech to spew whatever it is, their pro-Hitler stuff, they have a right to free speech to march for Hamas, they have a right to do this or right to do that. You're talking about terrorist entities, you're talking about neo-Nazi entities, that if they ever came to power, they would destroy every aspect of civil libertarianism, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution itself. I've talked to you on radio here, on Fox, and in my books about this issue of liberty that is so crucial in our lives. But liberty gives an opportunity for evil and tyranny to destroy it. And of course, man hasn't figured out how to fix it because it's unfixable. So when you hear people say they have a right to free speech to spew whatever it is, their pro-Hitler stuff, they have a right to free speech to march for Hamas, they have a right to do this or right to do that. You're talking about terrorist entities, you're talking about neo-Nazi entities, that if they ever came to power, they would destroy every aspect of civil libertarianism, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution itself. So I feel as long as I have free speech, and as long as I have platforms like this one, I need to speak out about it, because I have free speech too. And free speech doesn't mean you have to give a platform to an America hater, to a Marxist, to an Islamist, to a Jew hater, to a Christian hater. Why would I do that? It doesn't mean you have to debate somebody like that. What's the debate? We're not talking about think tank stuff. We're not talking about white papers, you know. We're talking about whether people have a right to live or not. People have a right to exist or not. And you're going to debate somebody who says no? Or somebody who platforms somebody who says no? No, I don't think so. What we need to do is to defeat people like that. Now, how do you defeat them? How does the average person defeat somebody like that who might be famous or infamous and have a big platform? You've got much more power than you know. You have an extraordinary amount of power. Look at Tibor Baranski. Look at what he did. You don't have to do that, thank God. But what you can do is talk, is communicate. Because if somebody's going to talk and communicate these evil, horrendous, anti-American, anti-God things, and then wrap themselves in the Bible or wrap themselves in affordability or whatever they're wrapping themselves in, we have an obligation, our generation, to our children and our grandchildren, to counter this. We have a right to speak too. We have a right to associate, to protest, and to march too. But at a minimum, we need to use our mouths. And you might say, but I don't have a big audience. I have my family, you know, we're going to have Thanksgiving. So what's wrong with that? Your kids and grandkids are being inundated with hate and evil on the internet, social media, by podcasters, so-called influencers, and they're making an enormous amount of money off the system. The system is how many people can you attract in one form or another, and that will determine if you become wealthy or not. That's it. So you have people who are saying the most damnable things and are building followings with people, but it's even worse. They're influencing the next generation of Americans. How? By teaching them lies, by teaching them evil, by teaching them hate, because they're not getting history and they're not getting real knowledge in too many of our public schools because the teachers' unions have no interest in promoting that. They're promoting their own radical left-wing agenda, the Mondami agenda. So it's left to us. But in truth, it's always been left to us. We shouldn't rely on government schools, should we? We need to rely on ourselves to raise our own children and grandchildren. At a minimum, to talk to them at the breakfast table, the dinner table, or pull them aside if they're coming up with one of these horrendous ideas and say, look, I want to talk to you about this. Churchill was a great leader and statesman. Hitler was a genocidal mass murderer. I want to explain these things to you, son. or daughter or grandchild, I want to talk to you about this. I want to tell you about the greatest generation and what they did that should make you a proud American, because they're not learning about it. I want to tell you about D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge. I want to tell you about the Battle of Iwo Jima and Guam. Men from all walks of life, all income categories. Most of them volunteered. Most of them were not drafted after we were hit at Pearl Harbor. What were they fighting against? And what were they fighting for? Now, we may not be near a military cemetery, but you can show them pictures of military cemeteries. People 17, 18, 19, 20, some of them well into their 30s and 40s, who gave their lives for our country to do what? To promote Hitler and Stalin? To promote America hatred, Jew hatred, Christian hatred? To open our doors to Marxist-Islamists to take over our cities? To open our party, we Republicans, we conservatives? To racists and bigots and anti-Semites and anti-Christian mouthpieces? Don't we owe it to them to speak out? We fought a civil war in this country. We had the greatest number of casualties than in any other war. And the most recent analysis is that there were over 700,000 casualties. And by casualties, I mean deaths. In a nation of 24 million people, over 700,000. Everyone who died in that war was an American. In the North, the fight was for the Union and to end slavery. The Republican Party was founded as an abolition party to abolish slavery. That's the basis for the founding of the Republican Party. Not so with the Democrat Party, but that said, this was a horrendous war. Now, some of the people who were fighting in the South never owned a slave. In fact, most of them never owned a slave. The vast majority of men who fought for the Confederacy never owned a slave. But they were defending the South. They were defending the practice of slavery. And they were defending their ancestry. Their ancestry. But a number of those who fought did own slaves, particularly higher up the ranks that you went. And so this was a battle to end slavery. And then later to try and end racism and bigotry. You know, Ulysses S. Grant was a tremendous president. He was a tremendous general. And of course, his critics, particularly early on during Reconstruction, they mocked him as a drunk. All that stuff comes out of the old Confederacy and the Klan and so forth. He did drink a lot, but he was not a drunk. He was a tremendous general. He was also a tremendous president. Lincoln's assassinated. Andrew Johnson becomes president. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat from Tennessee. He actually opposed the institution of slavery, but was a racist, if that makes sense to you. Well, I guess we have some of those today, don't we? But yes. And so when Lincoln was assassinated, he becomes president, and he was a drunk. And he was a disaster in every respect, particularly during Reconstruction. He didn't really support it. He didn't really support integration. And so they tried to impeach him and remove him. And what's amazing about that, as a footnote, is you have history books written about how courageous some of these senators were, one in particular, who voted against removing him, who stood up against the crowd. He should have been removed. He was awful. The Klan got very, very powerful when he was president in the South. The Klan was made up of mostly former Confederate soldiers. And the Klan was founded by a former Confederate general, who, by the way, about 20 years later regretted it, but nonetheless he did what he did. So what did Grant do? Grant sent the United States Army into the South to destroy the Klan. They were lynching freed blacks. They were preventing them from voting. They were doing all the things that were horrendous that you've heard about. They were doing it, and it was frightening. It was like their own little army to police the South. And Grant said, no, we're not going to do that. So he sent the army down there, and they were defeating the Klan. Then what happened? The Democrats won the House of Representatives. Then what happened? They cut off all funding to Grant and the United States Army related to defeating the Klan. That's what they did. My point to you is what? To get on memory lane a little bit, there's a good side and a bad side. There's a right side and a wrong side. We have to make these choices today. We have to make these choices today. And I think a lot of young people are being brainwashed. A lot of young people find some of what's being said entertaining. The facts and the history and the knowledge are not being shared with them by anybody, family members, public schools, certainly not colleges and universities that are pushing revolution, revolution, revolution of the left. And so that's our responsibility. Places like this, on this platform, on radio, on TV, and in books. People still read books, I hope. Some do anyway. So this is very, very important to understand. What else is important to understand? There's no negotiating with evil. I want to play a soundbite for you of a man who lived in and worked in and helped build what's called the Nir Oz kibbutz on the border.
Woman.
It's a woman?
Yes.
Then it's a different clip. It's all right. A woman. And this kibbutz was attacked on October 7th. Now, if truth be told, and it will be here, many of the people who live on what we call these kibbutzim, these multiple kibbutz on the border with Gaza, were liberals, were leftists. They weren't Likud. Most of them didn't vote for Netanyahu. They voted for some of the most left-wing politicians. Some of them supported a two-state solution. They invited the Palestinians into their homes. They treated them as friends. They gave them jobs. They watched over their children. They didn't have to do any of that. If they need medical treatment, they got a medical treatment. In fact, in Israel, just so we know here, if you are hurt or harmed and you need medical treatment, the hospitals have to take you in. It doesn't matter if you were a terrorist. It doesn't matter if you're from Syria, if you're from Qatar. That's what they do. Do you know that Sinwar needed an operation? He had been captured because he was a terrorist several decades ago, and he was in prison. He needed an operation. So he got an operation in an Israeli hospital. He could have been right next to an Israeli citizen, obviously under guard, but nonetheless. They saved his life. The Israelis saved Sinwar's life in the hospital with surgery. And then he was one of those released. Thousands of Palestinian terrorists were released in exchange for one IDF soldier that they had held for years. And he clearly was one of them. And Sinwar was in charge of the butchering of all those people on October 7th, some of whom he had to have known, because they view the Israelis worse than animals. And this is indoctrinated into their babies, into their children, day in and day out, day in and day out. So here we have an Israeli civilian, Irit Lahav. Her parents helped build the Nir Oz kibbutz. She wants to help rebuild it, but she's scared to death of another invasion. Go.
I'm afraid of terrorists entering my house. This is my fear. I'm not afraid of missiles. I'm afraid of terrorists coming from Gaza Strip, the way they did, and come to my house and kidnap me or kill me or rape me or whatever they've done already. It's a very vivid fear. And we saw that it had happened. And I think the Palestinians, we saw some polls saying that the 98% of the Palestinians support what had happened on October 7th. Before that, before October 7th attack, I thought that the people over there, the Palestinians, are good people, like me, who want peace. Now, after October 7th attack, I understand that they really, really hate us, and they think that rape, murder, and kidnap is a legitimate thing. And the world is saying okay to this, which is absurd.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.